I Sold My Life for 10,000 yen a year is a nihilistic story about a nihilistic person. Now, you may immediately rebuke me and say, how could I take away such a negative message from such a beautiful and heart-moving story? And to that I say, who the hell said nihilism is a bad thing? Why does not caring about anything immediately translate to having given up on life and being bogged down in depression? As in reality it doesn't. Nihilism can be just as positive as it can negative, and that is what this story shows. But before I explain, if you find yourself entertained at any point during the video, then consider liking, subscribing and ringing that bell. Anyway, on with the video. I Sold My Life for 10,000 yen a year, or as the original light novel is titled, 3 Days of Happiness, is a story about Kusanagi, a man who sells off his lifespan in exchange for just 300,000 yen. Not a small amount of money by any means, but at the same time not one most people would value a life at. As isn't life priceless? Isn't it something you are not supposed to put a price on? Well, in this manga they do. At first Kusanagi becomes overcome by a sense of meaninglessness. He doesn't know how to spend his remaining lifespan. He meets his childhood friend, he writes a will, he does all these things that he imagines would be expected of him. What he thinks he should do, not what he truly wants to do. As he says, he should have realised that Himeno hated him deep down, but he looked away because to believe she still loved him, that someone was waiting for him, was comforting to him. Or so he first thought, as it wasn't comforting. As even though Himeno was his focus, that was only because she was, in his mind, the last and only option for him. And so it's only after she rejects him that he realises that his last grasp at happiness was already gone, that he understood how meaningless it all was, how little his life amounted to. But it isn't despair he finds in this realisation, it is hope. We all have a passion, be it unconventional or not. And for Kusanagi, his passion was vending machines. Taking photos of them made him more happy than anything else. But before he comes to view life as meaningless, he would never do such a thing, because taking photos of vending machines isn't what makes a normal person happy. But because he no longer cares what others think, he is able to do it. Because nothing matters, it doesn't matter what he does and it doesn't matter what makes him happy. That is the lesson I took away from this manga, that happiness is the meaning of life. If you aren't happy, then life really is meaningless. Sure, you can be remembered, you can make an impact on the world, but at the end of the day, once you're dead, that doesn't amount to anything. There's nothing wrong with living your life for others or making a difference in the world, as long as it makes you happy. Live your life in whatever way you want, the way that makes you happy, because it is your life, and so if you don't make it a happy one, then what is the point? The only person who has control over your life is you, and so the only one who can make something of it is you. Nobody else can decide what your life is worth or whether you've lived a good one, because there are no objective measures of such things, only you, yourself, can decide. And that's why the premise of this series is so goddamn incredible. As our protagonist, Kusanagi, is someone who quite literally had his life's value dictated to him by other people. They call his life pretty much worthless and he agrees with their assessment. And this is because neither the company nor Kusanagi himself understands the true worth of one's life, that being happiness. It is explained that one's contribution to society plays a big part in the value of your life. When Kusanagi goes to the office for a second time to sell the rest of his lifespan, he is told that he can increase his value by painting, by leaving his legacy for the future. This is a metaphor for the values of society, because society and its expectations is what keeps Kusanagi from being happy. He wanted to just take pictures of vending machines, but that is weird. Society doesn't think there's any value in it. His photos of vending machines aren't going to be remembered as pieces of art, but to him they mean more than any random painting. As he says, the paintings he could paint would end up worthless to him. They say he should use his talents to paint paintings instead, but that wouldn't bring Kusanagi happiness. Hence why he chooses to sell off his last month and live 3 days of happiness, rather than spend a month painting for society's sake to increase his own value in the eyes of society. A constant theme of the series is that you should do what makes you happy, not what society says should make you happy. Seeing Himeno again, as already said, wasn't what he really wanted to do. Just what he thought he should do. As that made more sense to him, that was more logical. But people aren't logical, and neither is happiness. When Kusanagi walked around town with Miyagi, he was happy, happier than he had ever been before. Sure, people looked at him with disgust and laughed at him when he walked around town and talked with Miyagi, but over time Kusanagi started to realise that a lot of people instead did the opposite. People enjoyed seeing him talking to an imaginary girlfriend. Some thought he was doing some elaborate act, some thought he was delusional, others didn't know what to think. And this is a rather obvious metaphor for the views of society. At first people look down on him for acting strange, for acting outside the norm, for not going along with what society says he should. He is scorned for being different, as that is what society does. It pushes those who are different to the margins and berates them. And this is where nihilism comes in. The only reason society gets away with this, the only reason the different stay oppressed, is because they value the opinion of the oppressors of society. Society only holds power over you because you think it does. If you believe society to have value, then it does, and so it will have power over you and dictate to you. But if you don't believe it has any power, if you believe it and everything else is meaningless, then there is no longer anything to hold you down. If you see everyone else's opinions as meaningless, then they have no effect on you. Nihilism brings liberation, it brings freedom from being crushed by society and the meaning and value it forces down on you. And that's why, as the story goes on, more and more people come to his side. The people who once scorned him with looks of disgust come to his aid. Just as many people enjoy his antics, then hate them. Maybe it's because they were impressed by his commitment to the act, because they were drawn in by the allure of living such a carefree life, because they wanted a taste of such genuine happiness. But none of it mattered. The people coming around didn't change Kusunoki's outlook on life. He didn't feel happy for feeling included, as he already was happy. Instead, I'd argue this plot point that people coming to value his happiness is instead just another metaphor for the nature of us as people, that we don't all value life as just contributions to society, that deep down a lot of us also want the same nihilistic happiness Kusunoki showcased for all to see. That we can be happy just by seeing somebody else be happy. And why is he so happy? It isn't just about vending machines, as there is one big part of the story I have yet to mention, and that is Miyagi. Miyagi is a very tragic character in a lot of ways. Working a job of seeing people on their last legs, grasping and failing to attain happiness, it must be a depressing job. If any job makes you numb to happiness, it has to be this. Yet through Kusunoki, she got to see happiness up close. Not his happiness, her own. The story is as much about Miyagi finding happiness as it is Kusunoki. Hence why the ending of the story is the two making the same deal and living out their final 3 days together with each other. It's not a story of two people finding love as such, but more a story of two individuals finding happiness and meaning through one another. Her presence enabled him to discover the bliss of nihilism. If not for her, he wouldn't have been able to do what makes him happy without feeling the judgment of others. And he, by showing her a mere observer affection and love, enabled her to experience connection and live a life for herself. Because Miyagi has lived a cruel, lonely life. In order to make up for her debt, she had to become an observer. She lived a life of silently watching dying people, not able to be seen by others. She became a shell of her former self, as there was no one to even perceive her. Not everyone can find happiness in themselves. Lots of us need others. We're a social species after all. But Miyagi, due to her role as an observer, was stripped of this and so stripped of her happiness. All until she met Kusunoki, the person who wanted to talk to her, who wanted to befriend her, even if society said it was wrong. As Kusunoki came to understand that what makes you happy is what makes you happy, and nothing else can change that. He loves Miyagi, she makes him happy, so he will talk to her, walk with her, kiss her. What others think doesn't factor into it. As what does the looks of disgust on other people's faces have to do with him being happy? Their last 3 days of life in the views of the company and of society are pretty much worthless, but Kusunoki knows that those 3 days of him actually being happy hold far more value than his entire life. Maybe not to society or the company, but to him they do. As the story says, there is no point thinking about what happens after death, as the only time you can be happy is when you're alive. Sure, they cut their lives down to just 3 days, but those 3 days with just each other has value to them, as the meaning of one's life is the happiness one feels, and these two found meaning in their lives, even if it was only short, even if it was just 3 days of happiness. Comment of the week comes from Hi, it's Alex, and you certainly are a Chainsaw Man fan. And if you want to go the extra mile in supporting this channel, then consider pledging to my Patreon, where for as little as £2.75 a month, you can get your name at the end of the video, like Ikari Desu, 7SO, Ringjack9696, Dewey, and General Tonyos. So with all that said and done, I've been Seth the Sin, the Deadly Sin of Geek, and I'm signing out. Stay safe, everyone.